I'm sure sacrificing is one of the most exciting topics when we attack. Give up some pieces, rein the king's position, and deliver it a much desired beautiful checkmate. However, properly sacrificing demands fundamental knowledge. Many players lack it and make a lot of mistakes. Do you remember any examples from your games? For instance, a common mistake is to sacrifice when it's incorrect and stay with a huge material disadvantage. Another mistake that happens often is not to sacrifice at the right moment. Sacrificing is a very large topic, but in order not to overwhelm you with a lot of information, I'm going to talk about the main and most necessary things you need to know. We'll understand the point of sacrificing. We'll learn how we make our decisions, and we'll see fundamental concepts about when the sacrifice will or will not work. Let's go ahead and get started. Champions, in this video we're going to understand when we would like to sacrifice. One of the important conditions you need to take away is we sacrifice when it's concrete. In other words, we sacrifice when we are mating or getting a nice material advantage. At the moment it's white to move. How to play? First of all, let's understand. In order to sacrifice, we need to have some resources. Queen, knight and bishop next to opponent's king. Looks reasonable. Now let's check out the moves. If you thought about knight g7 with an idea to capture on h6, black can take knight g7. Now queen is defending the pawn on h6. When we are sacrificing, we need to have a purpose. At the moment, it's logical to think about knight takes h6. After pawn takes, queen h6 is a check. If black goes king g8, white can try to bring some pieces, go f4, rook f3, g3, but this could be a little slow. With some sort of knight g7 defending resources, black can try to prevent the attack. So, it would be unclear. Initially, if you found bishop takes h6, this is the right move. Now we're capturing the pawn, we'd like to take the second one. So if black is not capturing, we get a good material advantage. If black here is capturing, white is mating. Queen h6 check. King g8, knight e7 checkmate. So, the sacrifice at the beginning with bishop h6 was a correct decision. Let me mention that tactics and good vision of these kind of motifs is very important. And from our courses, Mating Matador and Tactic Ninja can be very, very helpful. Let's now go ahead and see another example. Here we go, champions. Another position when we are attacking. Queen, rook, bishop next to opponent's king. Seems like we have some good chances. Although opponent has some defenders, king is safe behind this pawn structure. So how to be? Let me also mention that the pawn on e5 is now hanging. Pause the video and think how would you continue here for white. If you here thought to go pawn f4 to defend on e5, in some occasions use the pawn. That's logical. However, this pawn f4 is suddenly closing our rook. We have learned that bringing the pieces is the key. If initially you thought about rook ag4, which is very logical, it's bad in a concrete sense. Black can capture. Bishop takes e5. Now the rook is hanging, bishop defends more on g7. So, turns out it's not a good choice as well. Sometimes we can sacrifice if it's concrete, and also this helps us to be fast. In other words here, white plays rook takes g7. Now we don't wait for bishop e5 or so on. We capture. There are two moves we need to calculate. First of all, king takes. Now, if we give a check with the queen, it will be too slow, but again, it's logical to bring more pieces. Rook g4 check, king h8 and queen takes h6 checkmate. And as well, after rook g7, your black captures with the knight. Now queen is hanging, so we can play queen h6 check, king g8, queen h7 checkmate. Another time, this was concrete. So champions, we need to have a good calculational abilities and good tactical vision. That's what will help us to identify whether we can sacrifice in a concrete way. But that's not the only condition when we would like to sacrifice. Let's go ahead and see that in the next video. Champions, Previously we've learned the condition when we were happy to sacrifice. It was when the sacrifice was concrete and we were either mating or winning a material. There can be also another type of a sacrifice. It depends on the intuition. This means that after the sacrifice it feels like opponent's king is crushed. There is no way to survive, you don't even need to go concrete. At the moment black has such an opportunity. I invite you to pause the video and think about black options. If you hear a thought about bishop takes g3, after pawn takes, white king is getting weakened on the second rank, but this is not a position when we can relax and say no matter what we are going to win. King is still behind the pawns, white may bring the pieces. Since we are sacrificing, it could be also an obligation, and we don't want to get these kind of unclear positions. Initially, if you thought about bishop h3 check, king takes and rook takes f2, take a look at this picture. Rook is cutting this king off on the second rank. All of our pieces are here. We have mating threats like queen h5, queen g3, some checks, rook is joining the game, so many moves. And in conditions when this king is just surrounded by our pieces, we don't really need to calculate. Visually it's becoming obvious that this king cannot escape. In other words, whenever we see a picture like this or similar, this means we can depend on our intuition and go for the sacrifice as well. Of course, this happens when we cannot calculate in a concrete way and variations may be a little complicated. Now, I invite you to go ahead and see our next video. Dear champions, long story short, what would you play here for white? Let's understand this position a little bit. Opponent king is in a very messy spot. Pawns are advanced, so this king is weak. We have some pieces nearby. If you thought about attacking moves like queen h3 or let's say pawn h4, that's doable. There are many options for white. However, there is a concrete one. Did you think of knight takes g5? We are destroying the pawn chain in front of opponent's king. f7 is hanging, queen h4 is hanging, rook h3 is coming. So, means black needs to take, and pawn takes. Now, queen is in front of the king. Our rook is just going to h3. Visually, this looks very dangerous. It's already a good reason to sacrifice. Let's imagine for a second, opponent defends with something like knight c3, covering the rook. Is this position deserving further calculations? I would say yes if these pieces were completely out of the game, but white has the resources. Here, white can bring the rook, let's say rook f3, rook f4, rook f6 ideas, going to the h file and mating the king. White can also play bishop d3, now queen h6, h7 ideas are unstoppable as well. There are other options, maybe we can start giving a check, then bring the rook. In other words, this position doesn't need our further calculations. Either way, white brings the pieces and is winning the game. So, intuition allows us to calculate, and whenever we're seeing a picture close to this one or to the previous position, this means that our sacrifice is reasonable and it might be working. Champions, let's shortly summarize what we've learned in the last several videos. We take to our slide, sacrifice when it's concrete. Trust to your intuition. As I have mentioned, I'm going to share with you the right criteria when the sacrifice can or can't work, or is required at all. That's what we will learn in the next videos. Let's go ahead. Champions, in this video, I'm going to share with you a knowledge about how to identify if we need to sacrifice or it's unnecessary. Here it's white to move. Pause the video and think, how would you play? There is an interesting possibility from the first view to take it on g7 and bring the pieces. Let's say here knight takes. If king takes, this is bad. We are winning with queen g5 check, king h8, going rook to g3. Now this is a checkmate threat. h7 will be hanging all the time, so black has hard times defending here. However, after knight takes g7, if black takes with the bishop, this is becoming very unclear. We need to bring our pieces, go rook g3, threatening some sort of queen g5 moves. Black will be also on time to bring the defenders. They can go here, a nice maneuver, knight e7, knight goes to g6. So in other words, we sacrifice something, it's totally unclear what's going on. In other words, we are taking a risk when it's unnecessary. Now, going back to the beginning position. Can't we just bring more pieces? For example, if you thought about rook g3, rook h3, that's good. Since the queen is the strongest piece, queen g5 is the best. Immediately we are creating a threat using the g7 g-file pin. We would like to go here, knight h6 check, take it on f7. We can attack differently, we can bring the rook. If black here is going g6, they are creating a little weaknesses around the king. We can still play knight h6. In other words, this position is not concrete, but we are attacking in a right logical way. We bring the pieces, and turns out that we attack for free, without sacrificing. This is what you need to remember. Free attack is better than attack with a sacrifice. In other words, if you can still attack without taking the risks, it's better, go for that. What is the reason? Whenever you sacrifice, you are taking huge responsibilities. As if your attack now doesn't work, you will end up, let's say, without a huge material. And if you go with queen g5 at the beginning, and even if your attack isn't succeeding at all, you will just end up with the equal material and playable position. Once again, I'm not saying never sacrifice, not at all. You perfectly know conditions which we sacrifice because we learned it previously. But once again, we sacrifice when we need to do this. Otherwise, if we can keep attacking without giving up a material, that's what we need to understand and remember. So, summarizing this video, free attack is better than attack with a sacrifice. Now, let's go ahead to another video where we'll understand whether our sacrificing ideas can work or they cannot. Theory champions, in this video we are going to understand whether the sacrifice is reasonable or it's not. Take a look at this position. Our queen is in front of opponent's king, and tell me, what do you think of idea to sacrifice with bishop h7, give up a piece for opponent king's defender pawn, and try to attack? Is it reasonable? If now we play bishop takes h7, king takes, what happens? We weakened opponent's king. We have a queen and no match. All of white pieces are away. In other words, after white sacrifices, white doesn't have enough resources to continue the attack. If you tell me knight d2, f3, g5, that's too slow. Black also will be on time to mobilize the pieces and bring them for the defense in different ways. For this reason, we don't want to sacrifice when we don't have an army behind to continue the attack. It would be different if there are no pawns in front of the king at all. King will be very exposed. But in conditions when king is just getting a little weaker and we need more resources and more army to attack and crush the king, we need to sacrifice in other conditions. Let me change the same position a little bit. Now, take a look at this one. What do you think? Do we need to attack here with bishop takes h7? That's not the only way. We can go knight g5, knight h5, maybe other moves. The thing is, even this sacrifice can be very logical because after a king takes, we have so many resources to continue. We can go knight h5, we can go knight g5 check. King goes back, we can bring the rook, we can bring the queen. In other words, we have a lot of resources. It's not necessarily to have so many pieces. I am just showing you the difference. In other words, whenever you sacrifice, make sure you will have enough resources to continue the pressure and attack opponent's king. Now, I invite you to go back and see one position which we saw at the beginning of the course. Champions, we're back to position which we have seen previously. Do you remember it? Now it's white to move. We have good chances to attack. Our pieces are active and around opponent's king. What will be your plan? Pause the video and think about it. If you really thought about going h4, trying to push h5, it's very logical, weakening the spot on g6. However, black can also use this time and bring some defenders. For example, it's interesting to go knight d7, queen to f8, maybe bring the inactive pieces into the game, so it could be complicated. At the beginning, black can play much better. Knight e5 is the first move. With the tempo, we attack on the bishop and bring this piece closer to the king. Black needs to defend the piece, let's say bishop d5. And now, we have 1, 2, 3 attackers on this spot. Black has 1, 2, and 3 defenders. This means, if we start capturing, we will have the queen eventually in front of opponent's king. So, we need to start either with, let's say, bishop g6, which is doable, or knight g6. Pawn takes, bishop takes g6. If now black is going king to h8, we can play bishop takes e8, for example, or take on h7. Either way, queen g7 is mating. So after bishop g6, black needs to take one more time. They can take with the pawn or with the knight, it's again the same. We're going to take it once again. Rook takes, pawn takes, queen takes. Yes, there are like some 3-4 move calculations, but you are ending up with this picture. What you can see that our queen is in front of naked king of opponent, and we have also a rook in the game. Understanding the concepts which we have learned, this means opponent's king is in a danger. If now black goes king h8, how would you mate here? Most probably something like rook g3 can also work, but if you are doing something, do it with the checks, as it's faster. Queen h6 check, king g8, rook g3 check, king f7, queen g7 checkmate. Very good. After queen g6 check, if black goes king f8, we this time don't have an option of rook f3 check because of the bishop. However, overall it will be logical to give a check with the queen. What's the thing? If sometimes we check with the rook, this king is getting some escape options. We need to prevent this. If we give a check with the queen, cutting these running out options, king goes back, and again we are mating with rook g3 check, king h7, queen g7 checkmate. So winning clearly. Previously we have learned different concepts, and one of them was not to sacrifice if we can attack for free. But keep in your mind, we sacrifice when it's concrete, we can calculate and figure out that we are winning. So knight e5, knight takes g6 or bishop takes g6 was the way of winning here for white. Now I invite you to go ahead and summarize our section. And now you are ready to bring a lot of nightmare for your opponents. In other words, having fundamental knowledge about the sacrifice will often put them in tough conditions while facing your attacks. We also have another takeaway to our slide. After the sacrifice, make sure you have enough resources to continue the attack. Free attack is better than attack with sacrifice. Depending on the playing style, some players prefer to play safer. While sometimes it's reasonable, on some occasions you need to take the risk. Don't be afraid to sacrifice if you think it will work, but at the same time pay attention and don't give away your army unnecessarily. As we have learned in this section, it's important to have resources when attacking, and in the next section we'll see how to involve our long-ranged pieces.